So, welcome everybody. Assalamu alaikum. I am really delighted and honored that Dr. Reza Baqir, from all of his extremely busy engagements, given the IMF program, given our macroeconomic crisis, has been able to take the time out to address research people and address concerned citizens. So I think this is a fantastic way to begin your governorship. Thank you very much. I'm also extremely grateful to Dr. Salman Shah, who's also an extremely busy man. He's now doing the job that I did a few years ago. And I know how busy that can keep one. And he's gracefully agreed to come and graciously agreed to come and speak to us. Tariq Sehgal, old friend and the wise man of Pakistan's business. He's been involved with not just private sector initiatives, but also giving a private sector perspective in policy making in Pakistan. So he comes with that very, very rich experience. So we are really fortunate to have this powerful group of people come and speak to us and in our normal environment actually have an interaction with us. So this is really wonderful. The format is a little different today. I'm going to request Dr. Reza Baqir to speak first, give us the macroeconomic vision of the government, of the State Bank of Pakistan, and really address the question that's in everybody's mind, which is, how does this macroeconomic framework tally with the need to finally get rid of this vicious cycle of growth for 3 years, back to crisis for 2 years, और ये जो cycle पिछले 3-4 governments से चलता आ रहा है, how do we get the comfort that this macroeconomic framework will finally address this vicious cycle so that we can get out of it and we can again stand shoulder to shoulder with other South Asian economies that have gone way past us. So that's essentially the topic on which Dr. Reza Baqir will speak. We will then take some questions, and then I will request Dr. Salman Shah to speak, and we can again take some questions for him, and then Tariq Sehgal, because he will be asking the most difficult questions of both of our main speakers. So that's the format, and with that, let me invite Dr. Reza Baqir.
Let me begin by first of all thanking all of you for coming here today. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank Dr. Ijaz Nabi, who I have known for a very long time. I think professionally since 1993, when I took my first job as a research analyst at the World Bank, and Dr. Saab used to be working at the World Bank at that time. It is also an honor for me to be part of such a distinguished panel. Dr. Saab, who I have read his work and hear him on TV, and Mr. Sehgal, who I have heard a lot about as well, so I feel privileged that I have this opportunity to be here with you today. Now, before I get into the topic, I also want to mention that I'm not here alone. We have another senior staff from the State Bank, Dr. Ali Chaudhary, who's standing right here. Maybe you could just show yourself to everybody. He's the head of our research and has been helping me as well as other senior staff of the State Bank in a number of different areas, so I'm glad that he could make it. Now, I am going to address the question today, but before I do that, I would like to qualify something, which is that I am going to approach this question primarily from the perspective of a central bank, and it's important to know what is the complementary role that a central bank plays vis-a-vis the government. And this distinction is often not appreciated enough, but I think at the beginning, I would like to explicitly note that I speak here today for the State Bank of Pakistan, which is a central bank. I do not speak here today for the government, and there is a reason for that. All modern economies try to have a central bank that is an autonomous organization which is primarily focused with a few goals: price stability, financial stability, and jobs and growth. But the government's mandate is, of course, a lot broader. So as we get into the topic and as I address some of your questions, इस बात का थोड़ा सा जहन में ख्याल रखिएगा कि मैं अपना जो मैंडेट है उसके लिहाज से आपसे मुखातिब हूँगा. Now, the question about macroeconomic stabilization and growth, I think the way I think it's useful to think about it is in a series of 3 questions. And in my mind, these 3 questions are: number 1, how does macro instability affect poverty and growth? Before we even talk about stability and growth, we should talk a little bit about how does instability affect our economic expansion, and very importantly, an issue that does not get discussed enough is poverty. Having shared with you a few thoughts on that, I then want to ask the question that if it is the case that instability reduces growth and increases poverty, does that automatically mean that stabilization will increase growth and reduce poverty? I think that's the second and a very important question, and it's not a straightforward answer. And I think third, what I would like to share with you is what is being done to address the causes of instability. And to me, the question about lasting stability is essentially a question about whether lasting efforts are made to address the causes of instability. So that's how I would like to structure my intervention today in a series of 3 questions. So let me begin first with the issue of how does macro instability affect growth and poverty. Now, macroeconomic instability can be divided into at least three different areas. Okay? And the first of these is what we typically call the external area. And by the external area, one of our main measures of external stability is what is happening to the external deficit: exports, imports, remittances, a few items. Now, if you have a situation on the external side, a typical situation of instability on the external side would be associated with, number 1, a rising current account deficit, depending upon the exchange rate regime, falling reserves. If these trends continue for a while, they lead to what is typically called a balance of payments crisis or pressures. As this situation continues, and modern economies like Pakistan share publicly the statistics with respect to gross reserves and other indicators, there is a sense of uncertainty and fears कि अगर external situation unsustainable है तो आगे क्या होएगा. Before we get into figuring out whether stability restores growth, I think it's important to appreciate that instability and the fears that it creates of what is ahead dampens investment, dampens jobs, and dampens growth, and is terrible for poverty. Okay? So I think it's important to first note what instability does. If you go back 6 months ago, if you look at the headlines of newspapers, it was all about what is being done on a lasting basis to address the rising imbalances that we have on the external side. IMF program is one part of it, okay, but there was a lot of concern in what is the strategy to address our imbalances. External instability ke saath, there is monetary instability, by which one good way to capture would be rising inflation. And rising inflation, people don't appreciate enough the effect that it has on poverty. It is, of course, a burden on everybody because it reduces our real living standards. But those who are better off have savings, either financial savings or non-financial savings, and are able to smooth their consumption. They are able to dissave when inflation rises, with the hope that when things get better, they will be able to save again. Unfortunately, the poor don't have this luxury, who are constrained because they can't borrow or they don't have any savings. Data on such things is very hard to get, but there is a number of studies that demonstrate that inflation is bad for income distribution and has a disproportionate burden on poverty. So that's the second point that I think is very important to note regarding what does instability do to growth and poverty. The third point, which I don't think gets appreciated often enough, is if you look at fiscal instability captured by, say, rising debt, what does that do for growth and for poverty? Now, one of the most immediate consequences of a fiscal deficit is, by definition, that you borrow. When you borrow, what that means is in the future years, your interest expense is going to be higher. When you keep on doing that for years, you inherit a budget where the interest expense is so much that it squeezes spending for social sectors or for service delivery. Now, again, this has a disproportionately bad impact on the poor. Why? Because those who can afford it can go to private schools. Those who can afford it can find ways around public services. But those who cannot afford it and are most dependent upon either social protection schemes or public service delivery in health or in education are worst hit. So by a combination of all these three things, what I want us to appreciate is that macro instability has these effects on growth and poverty. So let me then transition to the next question. Does this automatically mean that a program to restore stability will lead to growth and reduce poverty? So I think the way to address this question is first to note that it's necessary to have stability for growth and poverty reduction. But the question becomes, is it sufficient? And when you talk about whether it's sufficient or not, I think the first thing to be realistic, to appreciate, is that when you are trying to restore stability from a situation where instability has been growing, there is going to be a phase where there is a burden. It's a shared burden. It's a burden that falls on everybody. Again, falls disproportionately more on those who have less saving buffers. But it is one that has to be borne during the transition. And all stabilizations have a transition. I think what one can do during this transition, which is hard on everybody, is to protect the poor through social protection schemes. And when I talk a little bit more about what is being done, I will share with you what is being done in the government budget with regards to increasing spending for income support programs. Another key thing during this transition is that once a country has started on a path of restoring stability, observers know that it's tough. Observers know that there is a burden. Observers know that the government, an elected government, is going to be tested. And therefore, in that period, it is all the more critical to demonstrate that one is credibly committed to take it to its logical end. There are lots of examples of transitions that can be incomplete because of problems that come up. But the only way to get to the ultimate stage of restoring growth and poverty reduction is to demonstrate that a country has the will and the determination to take the reforms through, and there is a period of transition, but we will get through it. I think it's important, critically important, to demonstrate that commitment and credibility. So as one is in this transition, the question is, what should we do? Where is debate most fruitfully focused? Of course, one should look in the past to understand why we came to be where we came to be. But I think there comes a stage where one has to transition and move beyond a backward-looking analysis to focus on how do you make this transition a successful, how do you achieve sustained growth and poverty reduction? I think there are at least two things that are important. First is to focus on what are the institutional changes that need to be made in decision making so that the previous policies that were responsible for instability do not recur. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well when I come to the third part, but it's important at an institutional level to think there's a reason why we came in this situation. How do we prevent such decisions to come out again? I think, and critically, second part is that parallel to the efforts on stabilization, there has to be an extensive focus on structural reforms. Central banks typically focus on macroeconomic stabilization related issues, but that is not in any way to undermine the importance of structural reforms, which are critical that one does not repeatedly experience a boom and bust cycle. And there are many other measures as well. So in the second part of the argument, I had wanted to address to you the question, having agreed that instability is bad for growth, making a transition towards stability will generate falling poverty and rising growth, but there is something to be done for everybody in that phase. Now, I want to last focus on, therefore, what is being done right now to address instability and to give people the confidence that the causes of instability are being addressed. And I want to do that by first talking to you. Actually, before I do that, this was a picture I wanted to show just what happens in past stabilization programs, recent stabilization program. And this is a picture just of GDP growth in the context of stabilization programs, which you can proxy by having an IMF program. I don't know if the shaded area appears here or not, but if you look at the standby agreement that we had from November 8th to September 11th, you will see that it started off at a point when our GDP was, I think, 0.4%, correct, Ali? And then over the next 2 or 3 years, it rose as the stabilization took hold and people regained confidence about the future. Next, we have the extended fund facility from September of 13 to September of 16. That is not preceded by a reduction in growth, but again, during that stabilization program, GDP growth modestly increased. And finally, now we are on another IMF program, and I wanted to just demonstrate that as we go into this program, what has been the experience with recent stabilization programs. The point of this is that there is good ground to be optimistic about the future. So I want to talk about what is being done to restore stability and growth, or isme there are two fundamental causes. First, as I shared with you, was the external deficit, and I want to talk about why we had such a big deficit. Is chart pe in red is the current account deficit, and it starts off from about December of 2014 in the earlier parts of 2015, which was roughly in balance. Over the course of the subsequent few years, and this chart ends in December 17th for a particular purpose, you will see that the current account deficit has a trend decline. By a trend decline, I mean not just seasonal factors, but a structural decline. Concurrent with that, our exchange rate remains primarily non-responsive to an increase, a deficit in our inflows and outflows of foreign exchange. So you can figure out how that gap was being filled. And that was by spending our reserves. These are our reserves, these are called state bank reserves, but these are your reserves. And they were being spent to defend an exchange rate that was not defendable. Economists like to use a concept called real effective exchange rate. All it does is it takes your bilateral dollar-rupee exchange rate and adjusts for relative inflation rates between Pakistan and other countries where our exports will compete, or from countries from which we import. It's a more sophisticated way to basically make the same point that if you look at the blue line, our real exchange rate was actually appreciating in this time when the current account deficit was falling. So this is something on the external. What was happening while this was taking place? For those of you who are economists know that the current account deficit has a mirror image in savings investments balances. Okay. As saving investment balances deteriorate, they are reflected in the current account. So you will see that in this period, we had a rise in growth. But look at the composition of growth. The yellow bar is consumption. Growth came primarily from rising consumption in other ways by reducing savings. And that's just another way to tell you that the growth that was being experienced was not sustainable, was part of the reflection of instability that was growing. The second biggest cause of the instability was on the fiscal side, and this is a simple picture showing our debt and our fiscal deficits. And you will see that we had high debt, it came down, and then from a few years ago, debt has begun to go up as fiscal deficits have been high, and this rise in debt is in turn responsible for the constrained space for spending on social sectors. So then the question becomes, if this was the situation, these were the causes of instability, are they being addressed in a manner that gives us confidence? And I think that's the most critical point to focus on. So first, let's look at the external situation, the current account. And this is the same chart except it's been updated. And what I would like you to focus on is that once the exchange rate begins to be responsive to the balance of payments deficit and it begins to depreciate, the current account deficit begins to fall. This is the monthly current account deficit, which rose as much as $2 billion per month, unprecedentedly large in Pakistan's history. That current account deficit has now been halved. This has already happened. These are not projections. The point of this chart is to show that the actions that have been taken are already producing results. I showed you the real effective exchange rate. It's the same story if you look at the real effective exchange rate, that as that has begun to depreciate, our current account deficit is falling. Now, there is a part of our current account deficit that is not in our control. That has to do with oil. Oil payments have to be made, and they are not very responsive to the exchange rate. And they are out of our control because prices of oil are determined in the international market. So we may be doing everything possible, but if oil prices move in adverse directions, we can't reduce the current account deficit. Conversely, if oil prices are falling, current account deficit may be improving, but not due to anything that we've done. So it's important to also note that if you filter that out and you look at the non-oil current account deficit, that has been eliminated since the exchange rate began to move. Okay, this is a chart showing monthly non-oil current account deficits. You will see that it moved from a surplus position to a deficit position because of the fixed exchange rate. And since the exchange rate has begun to move, that deficit has been eliminated. Now, the point of all of these is simply to bolster our confidence that the actions that are being taken are producing the results in the right direction. The deficit that we had in the balance of payments is on its way to being removed. A reflection of this in the capital account is non-residents purchases in our stock market. This is a chart showing what non-residents have been doing over the last few months. And the point of this chart is that in that period of instability, when there were fears about the outlook for balance of payments, non-residents, which typically have had big investments in the Pakistani stock market, were selling That's shown by the blue bars. The point of this chart is to tell you that in the recent months, non-residents have stopped selling. In fact, more up-to-date data will show that they are buying. And furthermore, it's ironic that Pakistanis are selling and foreigners are buying. In other words, foreigners are right now more optimistic than Pakistanis. So we have to put this in perspective of what grounds do we have to be optimistic for the future. And the point of all of these is that the actions that are being taken are moving things in the right direction. Nevertheless, there is a transition, but once we get over this transition, we should have more growth and less poverty. What has been done on the monetary policy side? I showed you some charts earlier where the current account deficit was increasing. There was a consumption boom. Monetary policy at that time, interest rates were largely flat, as shown by this chart. They have since begun to rise. It's important to remember the reason why interest rates are raised. It's to fight inflation. And since about May of 2018, there has been a pronounced increase in interest rates, primarily with the objective to bring inflation down. Finally, what is being done on the fiscal side? The other main cause of the macroeconomic instability. Now, this is an area for the government. It's not an area for the state bank. So I'm not going to dwell much on this. But it is important to know that the budget targets a sizable improvement in the primary balance, which is the overall balance less interest expenditures. And that in turn consists of some measures to reduce the deficit, which are actually more than the headline reduction in the deficit. And why are they more? Because the budget entails some expansionary measures to increase spending on social programs and on development spending. So this 0.2% of social spending and 0.2% of development spending are examples of things that are being done during the transition to make it easier as we get high growth and lower poverty. So in addition to the quantitative fiscal measures, there is some qualitative things that have been done which are, in my view, extremely important. And they have a overlap with the work on the monetary policy side, and I want to make sure that we understand what these are. The first is that in the past several months, one of the biggest sources of financing the deficit of the government was the state bank. The economists in the audience would know that that is inflationary. That's equivalent to printing money. And I don't know if you know the system. The system is that if the government participates in an auction and is not able to generate sufficient bids for its demand, State Bank automatically creates MRTBs, treasury bills, to fund the deficit. Okay? If you look at the stock of this, it has grown exponentially over the past several months, which means that one reason why inflation has risen is because of this deficit financing by the central bank. So a very important qualitative measure in the new budget is that the financing from the state bank going forward will be zero. Furthermore, it's also a condition in the IMF program. And when I say a continuous PC, performance criteria, that means it's monitored on a continuous basis so that one cannot run deficits in the few weeks before the end of a quarter and then somehow balance them up at the end of the quarter. So this is a qualitative improvement. What does it mean? Why is it important? It's important because if that was one structural reason why inflation had risen, that structural reason has been addressed, and therefore there are good grounds to be optimistic that inflation will come down. So it's a qualitative improvement in the outlook for inflation. Second important part, I won't dwell on it, is that our debt profile, a lot to the short term, and one of the things that is envisioned is to re-profile this debt stock so that instead of having a lot of rollover requirements that have to be met within a year, the maturities of that are extended. And this is important for rebuilding our yield curve. Because of the pressures, because of the uncertainties, the government was forced to borrow at very, very short tenors. It's another symbol of instability. And as part of the program, those maturities are being extended so that our outlook for our payment requirements is more manageable than it has been in the past. Finally, as part of the measures is financing. A big part of this is the IMF package, of which 1 billion has been approved. It will unlock financing from other multilaterals, from the ADB in excess of 2 billion, from the World Bank in excess of 1 billion, many others. It also means that financing from bilaterals will be unlocked, and all the details of the financing will also be published in the IMF staff report that will soon be published. So I want to end by saying, summarizing maybe, why in the view of the State Bank, we have very good grounds to be optimistic about our outlook. And the first is that there has been a demonstrated improvement in the balance of payments that has come about with a greater exchange rate flexibility. A current account deficit that has not only halved, but in magnitude terms is much less than levels at which emerging markets experience stress, and a qualitative improvement in the outlook for inflation. I think a second key reason is the commitment that has been expressed by the government at the highest levels for reducing deficits and debt, and the shared burden of austerity amongst everybody, starting from the very top. Finally, an IMF program that is not only helpful from the perspective of enhancing the credibility of our own reform program, but is also important for unlocking financing at lower interest rates. So maybe I'll just end, because there is a lot of talk on the exchange rate flexibility. What does it mean? And there is a lot of speculation regarding what does a free float mean. So I have tried to clarify this before, but I think this is a good occasion to do that again. So if you look at the universe of choices that countries have, on one extreme is what is called a fixed exchange rate regime. This is what we had for relatively long periods of our history. At one point, 100 was the magic number, and the exchange rate would just stick around at that level. Now, a regime like that is not desirable for us because of that regime, and the charts that I showed you earlier is why we had a current account deficit, is why we had a fall in reserves, and is why we have been in a situation where we've had to go and borrow. So I think our experience credibly demonstrates that an exchange rate regime like that of the past has not been helpful for us in terms of our external stability. So if that is not desirable for us based upon our experience, another extreme is what is called a free float. And the free float is one where the authorities, meaning the State Bank, do not take any action in the determination of the exchange rate. They do not intervene at all. That is also not desirable for us and is not appropriate for us, and that is not our regime either. Instead, the system that is better for Pakistan in light of our experience is one what we call a market-based flexible exchange rate, where we give greater role for market forces of demand and supply to affect the value of the currency, just like any price that is traded. However, and this is critically important, a market like exchange rate in an emerging market such markets are not very deep. It is possible that prices in such markets can be divorced from fundamentals. There is, in addition to fundamentals, an important role of sentiment factors. At times like these, it is critically important for a central bank to step in and intervene. And this is our policy. We have a flexible exchange rate, but we also have the capacity to intervene if we feel that market conditions are disorderly. And I would like to point out to you that if you look at the recent behavior of the exchange rate, it has demonstrated two-way movement. It's not only just depreciated, but it has also appreciated. And we are watching it very closely. We have information that the market does not have. We know what are the open positions of banks. We know what the payments are. So we have a little bit more information to judge whether we are in a condition of disorderly market conditions. We are using that, and we plan to continue to use that information to make sure that the exchange rate does not become a free float, but reflects demand and supply conditions in an orderly manner. So I would like to stop here. I very much welcome the opportunity to take questions from the audience, because it's important that we have such an occasion. It's difficult sometimes to get to the state bank at the highest level. So I am very glad that in my own home city, I have the occasion for the first such interaction, and I am looking forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reza Baqir. For the researchers and economists among us, you couldn't have had a more comprehensive review of the macroeconomic situation in the country, the costs of not having a stabilization program, the key features of the centralization program, and what the assessment of their impact is now that we are into the program for several months. And for those of us who are concerned citizens, Dr. Baqir has done that in a way that is accessible to everybody. So that's a rare feat, and congratulations for doing that. Dr. Reza Baqir, you're extremely welcome to this forum, of which you are a non-resident honorary fellow, as you well know. So this is home grounds for you. With that, let me open this up for discussion, questions that people want to put to Dr. Baqir. We do not have press coverage of our events. That is to promote good, open discussion rather than posturing or people being excessively careful. So with that in mind, I invite questions from the audience. Please introduce yourself as you.
Imran Niazi, not the Bani Ghalaba, but a concerned citizen. I have two questions actually. One is, you talked about the transition plan. How long do these transitions take, in your opinion? And the number two is, you seem to have outlined good strategy and plans. Why do they change? What will make them change? That the government interferes, external pressures interfere, that we're going along the plan that has been set, and then all of a sudden we 6 months later hear that it's changed, or the results start showing that it was changed somewhere in between.
So shall we take a few? Okay. Anybody else have a question? Yes. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes. Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very informative. I'm Qasim. I'm actually an undergraduate, but I'm not here. I study in Duke University in America. I'm just here for over the summer and working at SERP, which is affiliated, of course, with this talk. And my question is related to what you said earlier about, so the decrease in current account deficit seems to have been by this free float, which allowed the currency to depreciate, which then reduced the deficit, and you showed a positive trend regarding that. But I mean, in my question only is, so the effect seems to have been like when the currency becomes more expensive, imports obviously fall, right? So that's how the deficit is reduced. Or could you just speak more about what relation that has to Pakistan's export base, and how what steps are being made to sort of diversify that or improve that? Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Jawad Khan. I'm the CEO of Punjab's Skill Development Fund. Thank you so much, Dr. Baqir, for making the time and coming to speak to us. Two questions. First is the notion that we have is that 60% of the imports that we need for our exports are imported. Sorry, the raw material is imported. So such depreciation in the exchange rate, how will that positively affect our exports when the when the raw material, which is all imported, has become so expensive? Number one. Number two is, you talked about the higher interest rates to stem inflation, but which also means that the cost of borrowing for businesses has gone up so much that it's not feasible for them to start investing. So how will new investment be generated to start to create growth again? Thank you.
Okay. Should we take one more? Sure. Okay. Please. Yes.
Kamran Niazi. There's two questions. One, you mentioned sentiment. So what are you going to do to improve the sentiments? As you said, Pakistanis are selling in the stock market. Two, currency hedging. How many Pakistani companies have the ability to hedge currency rate?
I'm sorry.
So those are the two questions.
Okay.
How do what is being done to improve sentiment within Pakistan, and currency rate hedging? How do you help businesses take care of that?
Thanks. Okay, so we've got 4 questions. The first one is, how long will we be on this path, and what are the likely deviations in the path? The second question is, what about the impact on exports of the exchange rate? The third question was the impact of depreciation on input costs and therefore competitiveness, and same thing, cost of borrowing, etc. And finally, market sentiment. I know this is a favorite topic of yours, market sentiment. So let's.
So I think maybe we can start in reverse order and address Kamran Sahib's question regarding sentiment. Okay, sentiment jo hai, it is a very amorphous concept. And of course there is role of fundamentals, but there is also a role of non-fundamental factors. There's a role of media, there is a role of social media, all sorts of factors. My view on how you bolster sentiment is through a candid discussion on facts. That's why, even in terms of the way we structured this presentation, was to demonstrate and share with people what is happening. Because facts are difficult to argue with. And if you know that the cause of your problem, let's say one cause is the current account deficit, okay? If you know on a factual basis that that cause has been halved, then logically you have to conclude that the problem that was leading to an adverse sentiment has been halved. Similarly, if you look at other facts, to me, I think disseminating such facts in a candid manner is probably the best way to try to address sentiment factors, that look at what's happening, look at the trend. Is the trend in the right direction or the wrong direction? We all agree that we have stock problems. So on our part, I think from the State Bank side, that is something that we would like to continue to do, and in fact do more of, to see what more we can do by way of communication, where we can share in a transparent manner our analysis of recent developments that should give more confidence. Now, I think beyond that, sentiment is a shared national responsibility. I think ultimately a country has to recognize that the problems that it faces are for all of us. It's very easy for us to not embrace the challenge of being confident, succumbing to fears and pressures. But we have to know that if we all do that, it'll be what we call a self-fulfilling hypothesis. On the other hand, if we are confident in our future and we have reason to be confident about our future based upon recent trends, then our confidence will be reflected not only in asset prices such as real estate or exchange rate or other prices, and that also will be a self-fulfilling hypothesis. So I think it's hard to answer that question beyond sharing with you that look at what's happening in the recent past and do a candid analysis on your sense. Hedging and all these things, I'm happy to talk maybe bilaterally to discuss what our plans are. You know, such instruments are helpful for smoothing volatility in exchange rates, but at the same time, it's also good to go down this path when your reserve position is quite strong and you're not experiencing balance of payments outflows. Javed Khan साहब का सवाल था that 60% of our exports are imported. So the impact of the currency. And I think the answer to this is that exports have a natural hedge. I agree that 60% of the imports are more expensive, but your output is now also valued more because it has benefited 100% from the depreciation of the exchange rate. So let me repeat that point again. This is very important. Exporters have a natural hedge against the currency because their export is becoming cheaper in international markets by 100% of the change in the exchange rate, while their imports, the cost is only going up by this metric 60%. So if any exporter is profitable, then that means that their net effect on them is positive. One should also not forget that another effect of an exchange rate depreciation is the help that it gives to import substitution industries. Example being, if you go and buy shoes, you can buy shoes which are domestically manufactured, or you can buy shoes that are imported. When the exchange rate depreciates, imported shoes become more expensive. So if there is some expenditure switching towards domestic shoes, well, that industry is going to grow. So in addition to the exporters, it's also important to know the beneficial impact on import substituting industries. Finally, you had a question regarding interest rates, and I'm glad you asked this question because there is a lot of debate regarding the channels through which interest rates affect economic activity and investment. So I think at the outset, one has to say that yes, one of the costs of raising interest rates is the effect that it has on the cost of funds to be borrowed for investment. Off the bat, one has to say yes. But then I think it is important to then ask yourself the question, being a forward-looking policymaker, what do you think is the right thing to do? Do you think we should not raise interest rates and therefore accept higher inflation and therefore accept higher inflation expectations and therefore have a recurrence of instability? Or, taking everything into account, we need to raise interest rates so that we bring inflation expectations back down, and once that is secured, we can bring interest rates back down so that investment can grow on a sustainable basis. In my view, this is a good illustration of a sustainable way to address a problem and a non-sustainable way to address the problem. Meaning that a sustainable way to address this problem is to bring inflation expectations down. You can only do so by demonstrating credibly that you're willing to incur the cost of fighting inflation by raising interest rates. And if you do that successfully, you don't need to maintain high interest rates for a long time. Second, based upon surveys that the State Bank has done on the factors that determine investment, cost of funds is one, but it is not the biggest. What people say, investors say in such surveys, is the ease of doing business, the licensing requirement, dealings with FBR, other such factors are a more important consideration than the cost of funds, and some businesses have internal sources of funds as well. So I'm saying that while it is correct that that has an impact, from surveys of investors, that is not brought about as the most important impact of interest rates. Besides, at the end of the day, a central bank has that as the primary tool, including for communication purposes, that if inflation is rising, a central bank is not going to stand by the sidelines and just watch inflation expectations continue to rise. Pakistan, fortunately, does not have a situation where inflation expectations get anchored into contracts. But there are other countries where that happens if inflation remains high for a long time. And bringing that inflation down is a lot more costly than bringing inflation down from a cyclical perspective. If you look at our history, our inflation has had years of low inflation as well, meaning 4, 5, 6, 7% as well. So the way the State Bank looks at it is to bring it down to that level so that interest rates can also be reduced. Isse pehle, there was a question regarding from Qasim, and I have to begin my answer by requesting you to not use a jargon that I'm trying to spend a lot of my time bringing people away from, which is free float. So we are not in a free float. A free float by definition means there is no room for intervention. We are in what we call a market-based flexible exchange rate. And you said that how does it lead to an improving current account? And you are absolutely right. कि अगर हम उसकी composition देखें तो अभी जो ज़्यादा improvement आई है वो import reduction से आई है. अब what does this mean? And is this unique? So the first answer to your question is that this is an extremely typical pattern across countries when there is a stabilization and the exchange rate depreciates. The quick response is always from import compression. इसकी वजह क्या है? बुनियादी इसकी वजह ये है कि एक्सपोर्ट इंडस्ट्रीज में कभी कभार कैपेसिटी कंस्ट्रेंट्स होती हैं और कोई अदर होती हैं कंस्ट्रेंट्स सच एज लाइसेंसिंग बिजनेस ये वो जिसकी वजह से उनके लिए कैपेसिटी इंक्रीज़ करना इतना आसान नहीं होता. लास्ट पॉइंट इसमें यह है कि अगर आप हमारे एक्सपोर्ट वॉल्यूम्स देखें, not values but volumes, you will see that our export volumes are actually also beginning to grow. Values have not grown because our unit prices have been falling. So there is momentum and change in the right direction. Imran Niazi Sahab, I think you had the toughest question, which is how long? And I think the way to answer that question is to focus on how resolute are you to take the actions to address the causes that led to this instability. So instead of giving you a blanket answer, because the blanket answer does not exist, it varies from country's experience and fundamentally depends upon the sustainability of the efforts. I would answer this question by saying that look at the charts shared with you on the current account deficit. Look at the trend. If you extrapolate that trend, you can see on this basis when the current account deficit would in fact be turning into a surplus. That's one way you can understand that your external problems are very close to already being resolved. With regards to fiscal, it's a budget that is targeting an improvement in the primary balance. I think people will be looking at the outturns. Lekin there is good grounds to be optimistic that these targets will be achieved because they are based primarily on tax policy changes. As you will note, पिछले सालों में and especially earlier, there were some tax policy changes that reduced the revenues. Some of those are being reversed on the income tax side. Then on the sales tax side, there are measures to broaden the base, not to raise the rate, but to broaden the base. The experience of other countries as well, these measures generate a quick turnaround in the revenue situation as well. And then finally, you have the commitment in the government at the very highest level to widen the tax base by going after tax evaders. And I think that we have very good grounds to be optimistic that that cause, we already agree that the external cause is being addressed from, what you saw earlier, that the fiscal side is also going to be addressed very soon. If you look at the last IMF program, the SBA, you had the rebound in growth within a year. Okay? And if you look at the experience of other countries, then a time frame like that, is also very much within the experience of other countries. But it fundamentally depends that we all remain together and all do our part to express the confidence in the future. And that can make the difference.
Thank you very much. I was going to have another round of questions addressed to Dr. Reza Baqir, but looking at time, I think, and looking at some excellent words of wisdom that we are going to hear from Dr. Salman Shah, and Tariq Sehgal, I think let's launch into the next phase of this presentation. I just want to say very quickly something on sentiments. Several years ago in Washington, I happened to know the senior personnel in the ministries of finance of India and Pakistan, and I brought them together for lunch. And they were listening to each other, and the topic was, how do you get the message across? On how the economy is being managed. So the wise Indian friend, he listened and then said, I understand what the problem is. In India, we have the same problem with our media. When we say that growth will be 5%, our media says the government is lying, the growth will be 7%. Whereas in your country, in Pakistan, when the government says the growth will be 5%, the media says the government is lying, it will be 3%. So the sentiment effect, the factor is extremely important, and what causes the Indians to be optimistic about themselves and what causes us to be so pessimistic about ourselves is something that we really need to think about. With that, Dr. Salman Shah.
Thank you, Ejaz. Thanks for organizing this very, very useful seminar or lecture or whatever discussion. And Tariq ko saath le aaye ho, who is a recipient of the macroeconomic policy fallout. And in the Punjab government, we are also the victims of, I would not say victims, but the impact is in the provincial level. So everything they do at the federal level, the impact is at the provincial level. And I think I'll start off from where Reza left, in a way that it's not just the interest rates or the exchange rates which are important, but I think it's also the investment climate, which we were talking about. It's also about the ease of doing business. And having worked in the Punjab government for 3-4 weeks now, but having studied Punjab for quite some time, the regulatory burden and the economic management burden, I think, is much more than the interest rates, even the exchange rate burden which we are facing right now. और उसमें अगर आप कोई भी rankings देख, and Punjab being 60% of Pakistan, around about that, and maybe the economic pie is even bigger over here. तो हर जो global index है of productivity or competitiveness or economic freedom or logistics index, I mean, you can take about 50-60 performance indicators in how well we are doing vis-a-vis the rest of the world. तो उसमें तो हम बहुत पीछे रह गए. And it is not just because of this crisis or because of the devaluations or whatever. It is because एक बहुत अरसे से there really hasn't been any reform at the grassroots levels where economic activity takes place. और उसमें I think when you have a macro crisis, probably that's the best time to do those reforms which you have not done for many, many years. So, अब मैं देखता हूँ कि when I joined the government, and before that I've been working on a spatial study of Punjab, the Punjab spatial strategy. So I realized that Punjab government is not really an economic manager. Punjab government is an administrative manager. They just administer things. They don't manage things. They don't, for example, if you look at education, so Punjab government would be more interested in के primary school की enrollment क्या है, etc., etc. But they will not really be interested in what is the meaning of education services, or is there a economy called education services. और लिहाजा वो पब्लिक सेक्टर के लिए बजट्स भी बनाएंगे और पॉलिसीज़ भी करेंगे, but they will not worry about the private sector. And we know that the private sector is probably bigger than the public sector in education. And so is the case with health. And so is the case with every other economic activity. So अगर आप एनर्जी डिपार्टमेंट पंजाब को देखें तो वो डिपार्टमेंट बना है to set up a few energy plants. It's not really been set up to ensure that Punjab is energy independent. या एक ऐसा सिस्टम बनाया जाए जिसमें energy costs can come down for the economy. So I think those reforms are very difficult to do in an environment where the entire bureaucracy is not even aware of the consequences of their actions in terms के उनका economic impact क्या है. So in Punjab we have about 40 departments which carry out different activities, primarily administrative activities, but each one of them has an economic impact. मसलन आपका एग्रीकल्चर डिपार्टमेंट है, आपका इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट है, आपका फूड सिक्योरिटी डिपार्टमेंट है, आपका फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट है, बट and maybe there might be others who have a very big impact on the energy sector as a whole. So energy sector के ऊपर 5 महकमे लगे हुए हैं and none of them really talks with each other. None of them thinks के हमारी एग्रीकल्चर में आउटपुट जो है $40 बिलियन की बजाय ये $100 बिलियन हो सकती है. None of them is thinking के if we do A, B, C, D, E, F, and we can get the output. So what we have done, and the Prime Minister has approved that, we are trying to bring in economic thinking into the government. So we have created 5 or 6 new positions. One position is an additional Chief Secretary for the service economy. And we got Mujtaba Paracha, the former Commissioner of Lahore, a PhD in taxation, I think, from Sussex. उसको हमने services economy का mandate दिया है to grow the services economy, which is about 60% of the total economy, to deregulate it to the extent possible, look at all the laws which affect the business in that area, and have a few targets to see where we can go. और उसका पूरी एक backup हमारी, so I've got at least PERI, I've got PITB, all the government agencies, क्योंकि 40 departments के पीछे 200 agencies हैं, and they are fairly good people over there, but they are not focused. So we are putting it कि जी services economy को grow करने में what are the hurdles, what is the bureaucratic thing, what we can do easily, stroke of the pen, उस किस्म के, we'll do it for service economy. Then we are putting in another chap, he will be additional Chief Secretary, agriculture and rural economy. तो जितने भी department agriculture और rural development के हैं, उनकी जो frameworks हैं, उनको जाके हमने देखना. So agriculture is, I mean, we know that the cropping pattern is totally out of line. It's food security की basis पे वो 100 साल से चल रहा है, and it's not moving to high value added agriculture. Water we waste. Extension services are non-existent. The farmer really doesn't know कि क्या करना है, कैसे करना है, modernization नहीं है, उसमें technology नहीं आई. And there are lots of small farmers who really need these services, and there are no such services. So the additional Chief Secretary of Agriculture and Rural Economy, his main task is to see how we can gradually change the cropping pattern, how we can change the productivity levels and connect the rural areas or agriculture corridors वगैरह के concepts. And similarly in the manufacturing area, we are getting a person who is going to coordinate everything on the manufacturing side. And there are huge amounts of regulatory issues over there, which we can deregulate. और उसमें it is something which we already have done lots of work on it, which can be done. And then the fourth one is an additional Chief Secretary for urbanization. Okay, urbanization, because we are one of the fastest urbanizing country in the world. And उसके मैंने जब rules देखे हैं, LDA के rules देखे हैं, दूसरे rules देखे हैं, it's amazing कि how over-regulated the whole thing is. और कई बार there's this building on Jail Road and it's a very nice building coming up, but उसके ऊपर एक चबूतरा सा उसने बनाया हुआ है. तो I've always been wondering कि ये क्यों इसने ये इस तरह से की है. So then I realized that there is a regulation called FAR, or it's a floor area ratio, something like that. तो वो ऊपर जाके वो पूरा floor नहीं बना सकता था, तो उसने आधा floor बना दी, just to meet that regulation. So I think there is so much that you can actually do in this thing. And then there is the additional Chief Secretary of Human Resource Development, whose main task would be to coordinate all the education and vocational training, higher education, with targets that what do we really need in the marketplace. And of course, जब मैंने planning को देखा, तो they had no idea about what is planning. वो तो सिर्फ department से जो projects आ जाते हैं, उनके ऊपर वो give and take करके annual development program बनाते हैं. So there is no strategy. We have a Punjab growth strategy and now we have a Punjab spatial strategy. And the big challenge is how do you get the planning department to actually take that strategy and implement it in the annual development programs and even on the current side, उनके जो expenditures वगैरह हैं. So I think that kind of reform, and I've been taking a review of the 56 companies, and it's amazing that very good ideas, but absolutely no control systems. Okay, thousands and billions of rupees have been spent for very good objectives, और काम उसमें हुआ ही कुछ नहीं. So I was looking at the Punjab Meat Company, and if you look at their mission and vision and their objectives, the whole idea was that they will establish a meat chain, value chain, right from the farm to the global markets. And all they have done is a slaughterhouse in Lahore. So effectiveness of policy, मतलब ये companies बड़ी अच्छी बनी, but nobody, after once they were formed, it seemed nobody really followed them up. उनके boards भी आधे बने, आधे नहीं बने. No reports are put up to the cabinet. Cabinet से वो parliament पे नहीं जाता. So the entire system is really out of tune, totally dysfunctional. So I think ये चीज़ें अगर हम कर लें, तो ये जो मैक्रो टाइप कॉस्ट अगर उनको आप कह सकते हैं, तो उनको आप मिटिगेट कर सकते हैं बाय डीरेगुलेशन. एंड नाउ पंजाब हैज़ लॉट्स एंड लॉट्स ऑफ एसेट्स, यू कैन प्राइवेटाइज देम. 2-3 तो पावर कंपनीज हैं विच कैन ईजली बी प्राइवेटाइज. And also, for example, in energy independence, they were saying that solar is the way forward. Kali Brazil had this tender at 1.7 cents per unit. So I called a meeting of the energy people and we discussed. They said, "Ji, there is no land. Kahan pe banayenge?" So then this guy was visiting me from the World Bank, and he said कि अपनी नहरों पे बना लें. So we have got so much land under the canal system, and the beauty of it is that along the canal there are also electric poles all over the place, and so every 10 kilometers you can put it into the grid. So आपको वो connectivity भी नहीं करनी पड़ रही, and this could be at 20,000 units you could do in a very almost in a public-private partnership mode, जिसके आपको budget से भी नहीं कुछ चाहिए. So Punjab has amazing kind of potential. इतनी चीज़ें हैं यहाँ पे which you can really harness, and the bottom line would be एक तो regulatory reforms करें, and then you have to convince the people to really come in and do the job. So I'll leave it at that and let's open it up.
This is really wonderful because normally at the time of macroeconomic stabilization, people often wonder where growth is going to come from because there isn't enough money for a public sector investment program. And what Dr. Salman Shah has told us is that you don't really need money. You need a good head. And you just need to address the regulations that have strangulated the private sector. This is wonderful complementarity between what Dr. Reza Baqir said and what Dr. Salman Shah said. And I completely second that, that Punjab government, all provincial governments, perhaps all governments in Pakistan need to rethink what the government's role is. At the time of budget making, the preoccupation has always been how many rupees are being spent in the sector. Not even how many roads are being completed, but how many rupees are being spent. और जो Dr. Shah ने कहा है कि what you should really think about is the actual extent of the service, and it doesn't matter whether it's being provided by the government sector or the private sector. Education, health, and many other sectors. If you think like that, you realize that the actual amount of public money that you need is quite small for the services that you can provide, and opens up the whole field of regulatory reform. So this is really wonderful to get this this intervention from Dr. Salman Shah. May I now request my friend, my colleague, my guide, Tariq, to give us the businessman's perspective.
Chaji, first of all, I'd like to compliment the governor on what has been for me 101 in macroeconomic stabilization programs and the strategy that's been employed. I have had the honor, I would say, to have served on the State Bank board, I think 2 or 3 times, if I recall correctly, under a host of governors. And certainly you're not only the youngest one, but the best dressed one as well. So we shall see whether the early gains that you've highlighted actually gain ground and lead to the stabilization that we're looking for. Now, when my old friend Ijaz invited me to be a panelist here at this discussion, I did say to him that I can't really probably be representing the business community's point of view, because I'm probably at variance and in a very small minority to the way the business community is thinking right now about these sharp stabilization programs and these very sharp fiscal adjustments that are taking place or that are sought to be taking place. But you know, the irony is that I've actually propagated that we should have followed this path some over 20 years ago. In fact, a VAT-based or a VAT-moded GST has been my call to various governments for over 2 decades. And the 2 or 3 forays that took place, Governor, in trying to implement a VAT-based program failed because those very governments that actually introduced them didn't have the gumption or the strength to carry them and see them through. Some little intervention from the markets, and they backed off. And this did not just restrict itself to political governments. In fact, the first big backing off was by my friend Pervez Musharraf in the year 2000. उन्होंने program लगाया VAT based कि हम इसको we will follow this through, we will document, but it was abandoned. So I'm in that sense possibly not the right man to be presenting the private sector's view, because unfortunately the private sector, or at least the bazaar part of it, the market part of it, is actually taking this very negatively. So I think it is incumbent that the commitment to this program and seeing it through is a firm one. And ultimately, those that don't want to come within the net, they must cease to do business. Usme in the short term, हमें pains लेनी पड़ेंगी. We are going to have maybe a slowdown in the first 6 months or so. It could extend to 6 months. But I think that the pain that we will take in those 6 months for the larger gains on at least the fiscal consolidation in later stages will be very great. So you as, I know you've restricted your discussion to the macro side, and you've restricted it to the state bank point of view. But I think you are part of the economic thinking group that is actually creating these plans. And therefore, the message that I would at least like to see you carry back is this, that despite the pains that we will have to go through, and I'm going through those pains in my own businesses. I have gone through those pains. For instance, the cement dealers, which is a very large part of my business, they are on strike. But we have taken a policy decision in our board that we will only deal with those people who register themselves. And we are suffering. But in the end, I think our boys and girls who work for us in our sales departments, they will find the right people. They will find the people who are willing to work within the chain. So I would like to see this initiative carried through. So in that sense, Ijaz, I probably am the wrong person. But I would like to just, I don't know how much time.
That's a perfectly good private sector perspective.
Okay. I don't know how much time we have, but I just sat yesterday and this morning and jotted down a few issues that I would like to share with not only the governor and Salman Shah, but also the scholars that you have here, the thinkers, and maybe this message will go back to government as well. I actually believe that these macroeconomic imbalances have actually not been created externally. They've actually always been created by us ourselves. We have been our worst enemies. And I'm sorry to say, but in the last program, where you show spike in growth, Governor, in fact, the then IMF managers somewhat abandoned their responsibilities in seeing to it that the coordinates, the dictates of those programs were properly carried out. Yeah. They, in fact, I don't know who was the chap called, Harold Finger?
Yes.
And his team. And I did have occasion to meet him informally. And I did point out that we were sowing the seeds for a very major and massive macroeconomic crisis in years to come. Currency and its relative value was discussed by me with him. These government spending, profligate, the fiscal balances that were being created, the borrowing that was being taken from the state bank, because I think I happened to be, probably on the board at that time, and I could see that this fast, hot money that was being given to the government for its profligate spending. So all of these, the makings of a macroeconomic crisis were always there. And when we say कि IMF आता है, वो अपने dictates जब देता है, तो वहाँ पे एक discipline create हो जाता है. Well, be that as it may, लेकिन last program में वो discipline was not there. I do hope that the pain that goes with creating that discipline and living with that discipline will this time not, will be adhered to, and we will not turn turtle. अब fiscal side पे आ जाएं. अब the initiative or the targets that have been taken, I think, are unrealistic. मेरे ख्याल में they are not achievable. इसलिए कि I just did a quick number on values. अब देखें ना, point ये है कि हमने we collected some 3760 billion for FY19. We are meant to do what? We've got to do what? 5500. Add another additional 1800 billion, 1.8 trillion in a marketplace which is actually going to shrink. I think that the first 3 months, or at least even the first 6 months of 1920 fiscal, might actually show very poor GDP growth figures, I feel. Businesses will slow down, they're already in a slowdown, and as we adjust with these fiscal measures that are being taken, administrative measures, this will actually lower growth, which might be good for the macro numbers. On the current account, it might actually manifest itself and show good results. But on the fiscal side, we might actually need some adjustments as we go along. So this is one fear that I have going through, that there may be a mini budget that might actually be necessitated, because the numbers will be so out of sync with what has been planned. And I think that on the negative side, one must actually prepare for this actually to happen. Two other quick points. I've got several, but we've talked about investment. A point here: how will investment be reinvigorated? I just point out one thing from a personal number. At the height of the stock market boom, or whatever you want to call it, and because obviously of the inflated value of the rupee, a share in one of my companies was worth $1.20. A 10 rupee share, Governor, was worth $1.20. It's available now for 20 cents on the dollar. The decimation of wealth in my case has been to the extent of about 80%. And that's the point I'm trying to make, that even though I say that earnings are poor, they're very poor, they've halved, maybe even more, but it's a very attractive valuation. So those numbers might actually show further improvement. As quarterly earnings are shown by the companies, you will probably see more investor interest in certainly the better companies where people have. So I say this is not bad. It's an adjustment that's taken place. Now, when and if the macroeconomic stabilization and the fiscal consolidation does take place, we will see that those guys will make a lot of money that have invested it at these values which do not actually reflect the correct values of those companies. So we shouldn't really worry about this. Confidence will build itself up. It's going to take time. And in the context of confidence, I think dialogue is very important. I get the impression, Governor, that the dialogue between the business community is a wee bit strained. I get the impression. I'm out of it, but I think you need to talk to them, give them the bad news. Just the threatening part of it, ये डरा धमका के काम, इसके मिनिमल रिटर्न्स होते हैं. हमने अपनी कंपनीज में देख लिया, अपनी फैमिलीज में देख लिया, अपने दोस्तों के साथ देख लिया कि एम्पैथी जब तक आप नहीं डिस्प्ले करेंगे ना और डायलॉग नहीं करेंगे, तो इसका हाँ डराएं भी ज़रूर, टेक देम टू टास्क, बट द स्टिक एंड द कैरेट. I detect not enough vibrant a dialogue between business and those that are the. You've come here, I think this will go a long way. आप आए हैं यहाँ पे, this word will be carried, far and wide. कि अच्छा भाई आपके macroeconomic stability आ रही है, आपके first numbers are encouraging. But a word of caution there also. I don't want to take the fun away from the party. देखिए ये जो आपका mix है ना of your fiscal, ये जो आपकी current account deficit की reduction है, इसका mix जो है उसको study करना बड़ी ज़रूरी है. ये किस तरह वाक़या हुआ है? It is actually a very sharp decline in capital goods import. So point ये है कि consumption में decrease आई है या नहीं by these efforts. Wasteful consumption, that, so I would suggest, and I'm sure your colleagues and you look at it, लेकिन the mix of this fiscal, of this current account deficit and its reduction is also as important, and I don't worry too much if there is a little bit of a spike, but it goes towards the import of capital goods. And lastly, this is the issue of governance. और वो डॉक्टर साहब गवर्नेंस का इशू जो है वो ये है कि we have introduced my friend Shabbar Zaidi, that he and I have been working together for over 20 years. Ferguson's have been our company's advisors and tax consultants, etc. Respect, very dear friend of mine. बट ये जो 25,000 वहाँ पे लोग बैठे हुए हैं, उनका किबला हम कैसे बदलेंगे? देयर लाइज द चैलेंज. इसलिए कि अब हमने क्या किया है कि हमने ये कहा है कि जनाब हमने इसको ज़ीरो रेटिंग को ख़त्म करना है. हमारे 3 पहले तजर्बे जो थे वो डॉक्टर साहब फेल हुए, इसलिए कि ये लोग पैसे वापस नहीं देते थे, जो रिफंड्स थे या रिबेट्स थे या जो भी वो कहलाते हैं, बिकॉज दे यूज टू ऐड दैट इनटू देयर रिसीट्स and bolster up their receipts. तो क्या अब systems ऐसे होंगे कि ये electronically होगा या उन पे भी कोई penalties होंगी कि वो अगर नहीं पे करते, और अगर ये ना हुई तो फिर मुझे थोड़ा सा खदशा ये है डॉक्टर साहब कि आपकी एक्सपोर्ट्स जो हैं वो शायद फॉर द शॉर्ट टर्म गिर जाएं, rather than registering an increase from the point of view of the correct valuation of the dollar or of the rupee. So that flip might actually lead to disaster also if the money is tied up. So therefore administrative measures जो हैं वो इनके बहुत ज़रूरी हैं. If history repeats itself, then I think we'll be up the creek without a paddle. So thank you very much, Jasa, for inviting me, and I was, as I said, much impressed to hear you speak in simple jargon that even a unpad like me could understand.
Okay, so we've had 3 perspectives on where we are: the macro, the what we can still do, what to stimulate growth despite not having rupees to spend, and then the actual view from the ground at the level of transactions. Great to set large targets for FBR, but the people who are running FBR leave a lot of worry. So ये 3 perspective हैं और तीनों बहुत अहम हैं. I now open it for discussion, general discussion, and let's hear from you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Fatima Asad Saeed from Abacus Consulting. Thank you so much for this insightful discourse. And I just want to reiterate what Tariq Sahab was saying also about effective communication. So there's visibility at all levels to all stakeholders. And unless that is not, does not take place, then the consistency of the program that you've outlined may take longer, or there would be risks involved in terms of the challenges to manage that. My question is also directed towards Dr. Salman, and it's very positive to hear that there are changes that are in the offing, and you're considering why after assessment of what changes should be brought about. But one of the factors for effective change management is to ensure that there's an integrated approach within all stakeholders. And one of the mainstays is the bureaucracy and the challenges that remain within that. To change that particular organization is, I believe, I am sure you've considered that as well. What can we do in order to facilitate that? Because it's not just about reform and policy redefinition, but it's also about capability and capacity building.
Okay. Yes, please. Over there. Piche?
Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Nofal. My question is to Dr. Salman Shah. Dr. Saab, apart from the profligate spending that you mentioned in your talk, what is your view on the impact of 18th Amendment and the NFC award criteria on the fiscal imbalance? And how do you see that happening in the future, even if we are able to increase our overall tax pie? One question to Dr. Baqir Saab also, if I may. In your presentation, it was a very encouraging sign that the REER is, or the current account deficit is sharply following the reduction in REER. Was it ever a policy option to go the regulatory duty route to stop the consumption-based spending rather than the depreciation route? Thank you.
Okay. Please.
Assalamu alaikum ji. This is Naeem. I'm a manufacturer exporter of garments. And my question is like Dr. Salman Shah and Dr. Saab, and you say like about this ease of business, manufacturing and export. I think the SME is the major player in this like export business, but after Musharraf era, it's continuously falling apart. Because I myself like started working there. That was the time where the policy was very clear, and 7 years there was no change in that policy. We give quote example to Bangladesh. There is a 2005 policy which turned around everything. Right now, I can't export like LC for me, for SME is like a piece of paper. I can't use that LC. Banks are after me to get a collateral free personal loan, whatever. But like for SME loan, जी SME के लोन के लिए मुझे कोई नहीं, बैंक कहते हैं जी स्टेट बैंक जो है वो कोई collateral के बगैर आपको किसी किस्म की भी एडवांस नहीं देता कि आप कोई लोन ले सकें. Red class LC, even I get a red class LC from a customer and I could not cash it because state bank don't allow for any LC transfer like this unless you don't have the limits. और दिस इज़ अ प्रॉब्लम. प्लीज़ उनके रनिंग फाइनेंस जो इश्यूज़ हैं उनको एड्रेस करें. SME के SME इज़ a $167 billion market and Pakistan is not on the 25th position. 160, it's like I have the data and like it's a $167 billion market and only SME can, kids markets, kids garments, and only SME can do those kids garments because mega setup don't have the interest in 70 cent to $2.5 garments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me take this first.
Thank you. My name is Savail Hussain. I run a manufacturing firm. Dr. Baqir, I have a question and a small observation. The question is, we talked about the market competitive exchange rate. But does that practically mean that you are going to be functioning within a band on a day-to-day basis? Because I relate this now to my personal experience. So we manufacture, so we import our raw material, and there's a lot of uncertainty. We can't plan anything going forward right now because there's swings of up to 5% in a day or within 2 days from 165 to 157. So that's making planning exceedingly difficult. So the question is, when you talk about a market competitive exchange rate, will that involve a specific band of movement on a day-to-day basis? That's one question. Second is an observation, working in the real economy, which Tariq Uncle has also alluded to. And that is that the uncertainty right now in the real economy is being driven, apart from, I think, perhaps a lack of dialogue, an emphasis on the stick. But also, there's a very real fear of the FPR. So a lot of these people who are not interested in getting registered are afraid. There's genuine fear of extortion. And already they're getting messages. Our trade, for instance, which we have distributors, dealers all over the country. They have the tax man coming to them, telling them that, look, if you get registered, you're screwed. So we are going to, find ways out for you, but don't get registered. So this is something, this uncertainty has to be dealt with. FPR reform is vital if this thing has to be sustained.
I'll take two more questions. Aapka Iswata.
I have a quick question, Dr. My name is Asad Ali Khan. I'm the president of Abacus Consulting Technology. The Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan has made it mandatory for all publicly listed companies and the banking or the financial institutions to ensure compliance with IFRS 9. What's your perspective on this? The perspective of the State Bank of Pakistan.
Okay. Last one, and then we'll get the panelists to, yes.
My name is Taimur Daud from Descon. Question for Dr. Baqir.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Taimur Daud from Descon.
Okay.
Dr. Baqir, a question for you. Maybe it doesn't relate to what we've been talking about, but if you could shed some light on FATF and what sort of progress have been made on that, and what are your views on how confident are you that the country would come out of this? And the next question to Dr. Salman. We've been talking a lot about revenue generation. The provincial governments and the federal governments, we really don't talk about the expenditure side. So if you could shed some light what the provincial government is thinking on the expenditure side. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've had a series of good questions, and I think the last one puts both of you on the spot. So I don't know how you want to take them up, but I would have thought that if you just do it conversely.
I'll just take the gist of the questions. तो एक चीज़ तो ये है, I think we have not really yet recognized the new incentives in this economy. और ये business community is totally not focused on that. Number one, we have the cheapest labor in the world now, even cheaper than Bangladesh. Number two, everything in our import bill is an import substitution opportunity. And of course, with CPEC, it seems to me that like the foreigners are buying your stock at 10% of the real value, CPEC में भी आपकी सारी value chains Chinese ले लेंगे और हम बाहर बैठे रह जाएंगे. So I think we should recognize the opportunities as they are right now, and जो ज़रा तेज़ होंगे entrepreneurs वो जल्दी इसके ऊपर करेंगे. दूसरी बात ये है कि the reforms which at least in the Punjab which we are trying to do, और मैंने थोड़ी सी उसकी structure के बारे में बात की है, because this structure, the old structure has been there for 200 years, and it is really driven by the water irrigation economy. उसी पे DC ये वो सारे उसी पे बने हैं. तो economy जो manufacturing economy है या जो services economy है, उस पे ये administration is really not structured to deliver that. तो एक तो आपको structural changes, you have to do them. Number two, you have to do the process change. Processes have to be simplified. जो regulatory चीज़ें हैं वो सारी बहुत important हैं. And then the number three is the people which you were talking about. And people may be, I think you have to, I mean, we are not talking about it at this point in time, but our bureaucracy is really very underpaid, and they have a lot of power. And they have perks and all that kind of thing, and that needs to be revised, and of course they have to be trained accordingly. Or हमारी capacity building जो है department, we have a whole division for management processes and development, so that needs total revamping. So we have got every block in a way which covers everything, but we don't have those reforms which, so wo bhi reforms inshallah we'll be able to carry that out. और दूसरी जो last चीज़ है expenditure के ऊपर, I can say that the focus of the government at this point in time, I don't think is on expenditure constraints. And I was doing some work where our total expenditure to GDP is around 23%. We are collecting tax and non-tax revenue, total is around 14 to 15%, and we have very big gaps over there. And when I looked at Bangladesh, their government is 13% of GDP and their revenue is 10% of GDP. And their investment is 32% of GDP and our investment is 15% of GDP. So ye jo questions hain, jo central bank must look at is really the investment implications of what we are doing. Or usme, I don't see in the next year or two that investment will recover from Pakistanis. Maybe the Chinese may invest here, but वो locals को ज़रूर देख के साथ लेके वो चलेंगे. So that is the weak point, I think, in everything we are doing. And जितनी भी हमारी reforms हैं, वो falter करती हैं VAT पे आके. And I've been thinking about it, कि why is VAT so difficult for Pakistanis to take? So I've realized that VAT has been turned from a sales tax into a production tax. और वो इतनी ज़्यादा हर लेवल पे आप वो लगा रहे हैं, and then you hold it up कि it actually increases your production costs. और दूसरी बात ये है कि it is against the SMEs. VAT will encourage integrated companies. मसलन अगर एक टेक्सटाइल वाला है, so it will, Tariq Sehgal would be very happy with it because he will have a ginnery, he will have a spinning mill, he will have a weaving, he will have processing, he will have a garment, and he will export. तो इस पूरी चेन में उस पर कोई टैक्स नहीं लगेगा. बट अगर SME करेगा, स्पिन करेगा तो टैक्स देगा, वीविंग करेगा तो टैक्स देगा, गारमेंट लगाएगा तो टैक्स देगा, और जब वो एक्सपोर्ट करेगा तो फिर वो 6 महीने के बाद 8 महीने के बाद वो वापस करेगा. सो आई थिंक इट्स नो लॉन्गर अ सेल्स टैक्स, इट इज़ रियली अ प्रोडक्शन टैक्स. वो अब तो आपका जिनरी भी आ गई है ना इसमें.
देखें, द जिनरी दैट व्हेन अ जिनर पेज सेल्स टैक्स, if it is implemented properly as the law has been enacted, तो होगा ये डॉक्टर साहब के वो 17% on his value,
right,
वो पे करेगा sales tax.
right,
that sales tax paid will be an input tax for the spinner.
right. तो उसको फंसा लिया ना.
नहीं फंसाया नहीं. अगर आप उसको एडजस्ट कर दें तो फिर जो यान स्पिनर बेचेगा, he will adjust the input tax of the cotton.
Yes, but
and he would only have to pay on the value addition that is the concept of GST.
That is the concept
of VAT based. That has never been implemented.
वो implement नहीं हो रहा ना. That's where I am saying.
It is not it is not retrogressive. It is actually a very forward-looking tax. लेकिन ये है कि अगर वो फंस जाए और उसको आप governance issues create करें तो it will be a disaster.
But if you were an integrated company, अगर आप integrated company हैं तो you escape that refund.
So let's bring the discussion back to, I think a very important question was raised that most of the adjustment in the primary deficit is being expected from the tax effort. What about expenditure management? Getting consumers to pay for all of the inefficiencies of the utilities seems like a large burden for the consumer to carry. What's the government plan for improving the governance structures of the utilities to reduce the inefficiencies that the consumer is expected to pay right now? I think that's a very pertinent question, and I think this panel is best equipped to answer that.
Maybe I can address a few questions that came about from the audience as well as from Tariq Saab. And you say I very much appreciated your intervention and your intervention as well, and also appreciate your positive comments. I agree with everything, except I'm going to take issue with 2 points. The first point that I'm going to take issue with is what I believe you said, that it's too early to be optimistic. And I disagree with that, and I want to share why I disagree with that. And I think I have seen lots of cases in my experience, not Pakistan, but other countries, where you can get into a stabilization program from different perspectives. You can get into a program where things are deteriorating, or you can get into a program where things are already improving. And I think we need to realize, if you go back and you look, that we have gotten into a program when our balance of payment is already improving. This is not a typical case, and programs that usually have a much harder time at gestation are those where you get in a full-blown crisis where your BOP is deteriorating. So I do not subscribe to the view that it's too early to be optimistic. I am optimistic, and I would encourage others to be optimistic as well. And I am very confident that this year is going to be better than last year on account of the adjustment that is taking place. There was a very good point on communication, and I think that is well taken. As you know, the government has been doing a lot of communication. You will find the Minister of Finance, the Chairman FBR, Minister of State coming repeatedly on TV, trying to tell people what they are doing and so forth. At the central bank, typically central banks are slightly different. You know, they are usually very careful about communication. They come less often, and there are good reasons for that as well, because central banks are dealing in the markets. Markets can change, and they have to be careful when they come up, and generally it's in a constructed manner. So we have some organized venues in which we come and communicate. One is after the MPC, monetary policy meeting, that we do twice a year. So we'll have our next MPC coming soon, and we will also have a press conference after that. We are actually planning to do more communication as well, and we are thinking of how to do that, including by sharing facts such as these, which perhaps are less disputable. So at least we get those out there through some social media or some other vehicles, so that people at least get to see what the state bank is thinking. Regarding the exchange rate, I think when a country transitions from a system that was fixed to one where there is going to be more role for market forces, initially there is more volatility. But the experience of other countries shows decidedly that that volatility comes down as market participants get used to a slightly different way of the exchange rate. मैं अब इसकी आपको concrete इसकी मिसाल देता हूँ. At the end of June, there are a lot of payments. Multinationals, other companies, they have debt repayments. Some agencies have a budget that's going to expire on the 30th of June, so they have to get a lot out. So if you have to get a lot of payments out, and it's every June, by the way, in previous Junes you haven't seen this, because in previous Junes intervention amounts have been very, very large. Okay. So if there is this payment pressure, and obviously the outflow exceeds the inflow, and you let some of that get expressed in the rate, okay, then the decision as a central banker you have to make is this temporary or permanent? Because being a prudent central banker, you always want to be conservative as well. Because if you think it's all temporary, you go in by a big way, and turns out not to be temporary, that was not a wise decision to do. Okay? So I think that what we should do is put faith on the fact that the exchange rate reflected some of the demand and supply things. But then, look, it came back. Once the pressures ended, you're in the new month, where is the exchange rate today? So, you know, we have to have faith in the fact that agar market demand ki forces se wo rate badega ya kam hoega, that doesn't mean it's a free float, it will only move in one direction. You have evidence of two-way movements in front of you. Similarly, before Eid, if you remember, the exchange rate appreciated again. I find also the discussion on the exchange rate very asymmetric, When the rate goes up, everybody is talking about the rate going up. When the rate goes down, hardly anybody is talking about the rate coming down. Iski kya wajah?
Good news is no news.
We have to systematically, we have to stop discounting the good news. We have to focus, yes, we have problems, but we have a choice. We have a choice whether to be optimistic or to be pessimistic. And I think that's the choice that people need to focus on. Uske baad, so going forward, we don't expect such large movements on a daily basis. And there are reasons why that happened at that time, because of some particularly large payments that were also not planned for. See, in a previous system, if no matter what your payment may be as a bank treasurer, if you think that the central bank is sitting at the end of the day to make you whole, you will not plan your payment, right? But if you are now in a system where there's risk sharing, then as a treasurer of a bank, if you have a payment coming up, you are going to start building your position, you're going to start going long, so that on the day of the payment, you don't hit the market with a large order, but you are going to execute that payment having built some of your amounts already. So it is a stage that is not, this process is not unique to Pakistan. It happens in countries as they transition to a more flexible exchange rate system. Then there was some other questions. I think a very important question, I'm glad you raised it, regarding the FATF. And ISPE, I think there is, we are in a very good place, both in terms of the substance as well as in terms of the politics. Let me explain what I mean. FATF ki jo report hai, they have lots of action items on which they want Pakistan to demonstrate some progress. Us pe kaam ho raha hai, and at the highest level. And there is good progress being made on that stage. But in addition to that, we have a political issue, which is that some countries in the FATF have decided that they want, an adverse outcome for Pakistan. Now, obviously, a political problem you will tackle politically, and that is also being done in a very, very effective manner. So we, where we are very confident that this issue will not become an issue for us. And also related in all of this is the IMF. The IMF is also would not be entering into a program with us if it felt it be 3 months down the road there is going to be a FATF action. So I think on the side of the central bank, I think I have covered most of the questions. Perhaps one last one regarding the exchange rate duty. I think to use regulatory duties as opposed to exchange rate to address underlying balance of payment problems. I think this is a good question, and it goes back to the heart of the problem, which is what is the institution become counterproductive. The more you put a duty, the more you incentivize smuggling. So you have to ask whether is that a sustainable way to solve a problem which many other countries have solved simply by having an exchange rate system that is a little bit more flexible. अब ये बाकी सारे जो मुल्क हैं, थाईलैंड है, फिलीपींस है, और हैं, कोलंबिया है, ये वहाँ पे लोगों के पास एक फ्लेक्सिबल एक्सचेंज रेट सिस्टम है और लोग खुशी से मुतमईन होकर अपनी ज़िंदगी गुजार रहे हैं. टर्की है, बिजनेस है, इन्वेस्टमेंट हो रही है, सब कुछ हो रहा है. वो रेगुलेटरी ड्यूटीज़ को नहीं बात कर रहे कि उसी तरह उन्होंने अपना जो है डेफिसिट उसको एड्रेस करना है. So my point is कि a transition जो है when you are switching into a different scheme, yes, it takes time to get used to it, but we need to think that there are so many countries, emerging markets, that are doing very well financially and have this system, and the exchange rate is not a daily topic of discussion. You get used to something, and we just will get used to it, and we have, aside from our own reform program, a backstop of a big IMF program. And at the end of the day, IMF is not an organization that is usually optimistic. उनके जो नंबर निकलते हैं, वो जो बजट की assumptions रखते हैं, they're usually very, very pessimistic, So I think we should think कि facts की basis पे, it is definitely half full. I would say a lot more than half full at this stage. Thank you.
Sure.
I don't want to get into a crossfire with you, Governor, but I'm not pessimistic, not by nature. You know that. Otherwise, I would just blow this whole fiscal program to smithereens. I could. And that's what a lot of my community are doing. No, I'm pro it because I think that this pain has to be taken. मेरा जो था ना तज्जिया वो ये था कि ये अगले 6 महीने में एज वी एडजस्ट, इसमें जो फिजिकल एफर्ट है वो इतना ह्यूज है, 40% और मोर इंक्रीज ओवर लास्ट ईयर, कि ये मुझे थोड़ा सा अपहिल टास्क लगता है. दैट्स ऑल. आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि जी आपने ग्रोथ फिगर्स बड़े अनरियलिस्टिक रखे हुए हैं. ग्रोथ फिगर्स विल बी लो, बट अचीविंग दीज, you might actually paradoxically achieve the difficult part more easily, and that's your part. The macro part might be actually easier to the imbalances.
And you know, exchange rate depreciation has been helping FBR.
Of course, it has been helping FBR, and just to talk about regulatory duties, वो तो disastrous इसलिए होती हैं कि they actually hit the exporter. उसकी तो input price जो है वो और बढ़ जाती है. Therefore, वो तो एक that's a disastrous model to adopt.
और फिर आप उसको FBR look, we could go on and on. This is fantastic, but I think we must end it. This has been a fantastic session. I've always been optimistic, but now I feel comforted. Okay, my optimism rests on solid grounds. We have excellent leadership here. Salman Shah in Punjab is thinking of fantastic new ways of what can be done at the provincial level to stimulate growth. And Reza Baqir, Dr. Reza Baqir has given us a lot of room to feel comfortable that things are in good hands. Now, how things actually turn out, of course, our projections are optimistic. The real world doesn't always come out the way we want to, but what gives me a lot of comfort is that the macroeconomy is being managed by people who know what to do if there is turmoil along the way. And this is extremely reassuring. So with that, thank you very much.